Ruslan.
All right, guys, as some of you may know, there are over 8 million new firearms users, purchasers. I don't know what we're called. I'm one of the new 8 million, and today I have a fantastic guest. We are going to be talking about a lot. True conservatism, the culture war, T2A. I'm trying not to use specific words to not get demonetized. You know, that amendment, Second Amendment thing we got going. We're going to be talking about that in context of being a follower of Jesus. Her getting fired from Liberty University over standing up for, in my opinion, standing up for what was right with the Ahmaud Arbery thing. Why are the most often nastiest divisive voices in conservatisms are the ones that are promoted? And I'm so excited. She is a breath of fresh air. Without any further ado, we have Antonia Cover, not cover, but Cover, newly changed that. You're a new mom. You sent me a picture of your baby. Thank you so much for being here. So you are a representative for Gun Owners of America. You've been on platforms such as the Prager Report or PragerU, Ruben, what is his name? Ruben Report. I'm getting them twisted. Yeah. So for folks who don't know you, introduce yourself, and I got a ton of questions for you, and I've been loving the content you sent over, and so I'm super excited. We're going to talk about faith, God, all these different things. But yeah, for folks who don't know you, introduce yourself.
All right. Yeah, so I'm Antonia Cover. We'll see which part of that is going to be flagged. I'm trying my best not to make sure that you're not flagged on YouTube. So I am the national spokesperson for Gun Owners of America, also the director of outreach. Been there for about a couple of years now. As you can see behind me, I'm also the Empowered spokesperson, because I started Empowered 2A a few years ago as the founder, which is essentially a women's outreach group for those in the gun community, because now there's 22% of gun owners are women and growing fast, particularly Black women. And so that we needed a space for that. So I created that space, and now it's part of GOA, which is Gun Owners for America. That's a little snippet of what I'm doing right now, but for essentially I've been in this 2A space for since like 2012, when I decided that if I was going to be, and this is pre-becoming a born-again Christian, if I was going to be a good feminist at the time, then I really actually had to advocate for the empowerment of myself and other people, particularly other women, and that was through gun ownership. So that's a little bit about me.
Okay, so how did you become a born-again Christian? Because your husband is a pastor, and this is fairly new on your journey. How did that happen?
Yeah, so this is 2010 was when I became a born-again Christian. Grew up Roman Catholic. Not going to go into all of that, if you're saved or not, if you're Catholic. For me, it wasn't until I realized that I could have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, and I found that through my church at the time, which was the Village Church in Dallas. Matt Chandler.
Hey, yeah, Matt Chandler's awesome. Yes.
So yeah, so that was essentially my coming to faith, and through that's brought me to what I'm doing now. And a couple years ago, I met my husband on Christian Mingle, by the way.
Hello.
Okay, that's still okay. I'm not even getting paid for that. I'm not getting sponsored, but Christian Mingle does good things, doing the God's work. But yeah, that's where I am right now.
Right. Okay. Someone pointed out just now, it's not a big deal, but someone pointed out that your super dope necklace is potentially touching the mic and creating this little script. I hear it. I don't know how many other people hear it. I love the earrings, by the way. I'm gonna you gotta let me know where you got those, because maybe I'll get my wife some.
I'll let you know. Bullet girl jewelry. Okay, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, awesome. Wow. So there's a lot. Wow, there's a whole lot I want to talk to you about. Like, oh my gosh. Okay, so where do we begin? Oh wow. Where do you want to begin? Because there's so many different things that again, you're a breath of fresh air. You
say you're a new firearm owner.
Yes, I am a new firearm owner, one of the 8 million who went and got one after the pandemic. It just seemed like it may be a good idea to probably have a firearm. I now have 2. I'm gonna not say the names, but yes,
I'm gonna say you can share. You don't have to share. It's okay. This is a very sensitive.
Yeah, I have a Glock 19. I got a Glock 19, which I love. And then I also, like a goober, went and bought this is embarrassing, a High Point $380, yeah, like the cheapest
Jesus.
one.
I mean, not
just
either of those.
And now it's just,
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't touched that thing since, I haven't went near that thing since getting my 19. And then I told you my trainer is trying to sell me, shout out to Rich saying, he's trying to sell me a $4,000 PC
$4,000
carbine with all the bells and whistles and the scope and all that kind of stuff. That's like right up to the legal limit of what's allowed in in California. But yeah, and I do want to get a PC carbine. So the reason why I became one, it just seemed like wisdom, right? Just in terms of how things were looking, just to be safe and sorry. And then I also appreciate having healthy hobbies that aren't related to just creative stuff, the stuff that I do. So going and shooting with my buddies is super fun. And I do think it's a unique right that I don't think we really factor in. I've heard you describe it as a human right instead of just saying as an American thing. You describe it as a human right. Can you elaborate on that a bit, and why do you frame it in such a way?
Yeah, well, I actually don't frame it that way.
You don't frame it that way.
Well, I frame it, but it's not original to me.
Okay.
I'll say that.
Okay.
It's in the Constitution, the fact that we have certain inalienable rights that are given to us by our Creator, which is God, Jesus Christ. And so based on that, yes, if you're a human being, then yes, you have this right to self-defense, to defend yourself, those you care about. But even more so in the Constitution, it actually goes a different level. It goes to a different level. Not only are those human rights, but you have the right to keep and bear arms so that we can protect a free state, which is what we have right now. But in case we have an oppressive government, then we need the arms to make sure that we are not oppressed in a tyrannical government. So I'm going to make that clarification because that's going to go into a lot of the debate right now about AR-15s and man, if you're not flagged yet, you're going to be flagged. I'm sorry. I'm going to be talking to you. I'm going to talk about AR-15s. It's already happening. Yeah. So anyways, and all that to say, and your 9mm carbine, like things like that, right? That's guaranteed in the Constitution, but that's a protected right that already exists. It says the right to keep and bear arms, which means it wasn't given to us through our founders. It was protected through the Second Amendment.
That's good.
Because of God. It's God-given rights.
That's good.
That's why.
And so this is how I've looked at it so there was two times that, there's two different times where Jesus sends out the disciples. The first time he says, don't pack a cloak. Don't take a purse with you. Just go out, preach, let the people take care of you, right? And then the second time, which is in Luke 22, and I pulled up the whole chapter just so I'm not referencing out of context, but this is a very popular passage, and this is and when I read this, I was like, wow, this really makes sense. Wait, I think it's Luke 22. Yeah, Luke 22 verse 36. Okay. And I'll read it in the NIV. This is right after Peter betrays him. He tells Peter that he's going to betray him in verse 34. Verse 35, he says, then Jesus asked him, when I sent you without a purse, bag, or sandals, did you lack anything? Okay, so, hey, remember that one time I sent you out without a bag, without a purse, without sandals? Did you lack anything? The disciples said nothing. Okay, he said to them, but now if you have a purse, take it, and also a bag. And if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. It is written, and he was numbered with the transgressors, and I tell you that this must be fulfilled in me. Yes, what is written about me is reaching fulfillments. And then the disciples said, see, Lord, here are 2 swords. And he says, that's enough. He replies, that's enough, with an exclamation point. So this verse right here, 36, the first time they go out, they don't have anything, and they were taken care of, and they went from town to town. The second time, though, he tells them to be prepared. He tells them that, hey, it's gonna get real out here, right? That this is gonna be tough, and hey, if you got a bag, if you aren't prepared, and then he says, if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and get a sword. And when I read that passage, and I read it in context, for me, the verse 36, Luke 22, verse 36, I'll say it as many times as you guys need me to. So what is the modern equivalent of a sword? A firearm. And that was, for me, was like, hey, you know what? There's probably some wisdom. And I'm not the guy that's going to go and get hundreds and hundreds, and I'm not the doomsday prepper type, but I do think there's wisdom in being able to protect your home, to being able to protect your family, to being able to, for my situation, many of you guys don't know this, in my situation, I've had death threats, I've had threats of violence against me, so I am going to work towards getting a conceal and carry until I'm able to hire professional security. But who wants to, pay? Be Tekashi 6ix9ine out here with thousands of dollars of professional security. And so that's my framework of it. I'd love to hear yours in terms of how you view because there's going to be a lot of folks that are like, why should you have firearms and be a Christian and right? How does your paradigm work in that?
Yeah, I think it's particularly in that context. I mean, even says in the Old Testament, it talks about essentially, and this is, paraphrasing, but it's essentially giving permission, right? Saying that if you are in a situation where it's dark and someone's trying to go into your home and you kill him in essentially self-defense because you weren't aware it was self-defense in that scenario, then you are not guilty. And essentially it's showing that self-defense, obviously, is not because he's just cold. He's not right out just committing murder. And if he had seen him, maybe it would have been a different scenario. But it's showing that in a scenario where your life is threatened, right, or your family's life is threatened, and it's obviously someone with bad intentions coming into your home at the dark of night, then yes, you have the ability to defend yourself. And that's the big context, the big scenario that a lot of people in the gun world who are also Christian like me, who are showing that, no, you don't have to be a pacifist in order to be a Christian. You have the right, you have the human right to defend yourself and those that and your home and those that you care about. Yeah. So essentially that is the small nugget, the core. There's a lot of different facets to that. There's many layers to that for sure. Kind of like we were talking about as well. But yeah, it goes down to the fact that it's about self-defense. It's not that we're going out and trying to kill, to murder, right? We're trying to defend. And so that's the big difference. So, yeah. I love it.
And again, some people are listening to this like, what? How do you firearms, Christians, firearms? Like, I'm just keeping an eye on the chat, and I know the comments are going to be there.
Well, that's why I'm here. I'm here for questions and here for answers of those questions.
Yeah, so, and we'll get into some of your guys' questions towards the end. So just, rock with us for now. Okay, so let me get into something that I was extremely, oh gosh, what a breath of fresh air you are. I follow Coleon, and then your stuff is, I think, really good. So unfortunately, sometimes in the conservative community, the faces and the names that are promoted tend to be the most polarizing and a lot of times divisive voices. And there's a clip that you guys could look up, and it's you, Hotep Jesus, a handful of other people, and Tatum. Brandon Tatum and Bryson Gray. And you talked about protecting yourself, right? And you made this point that you drove home that I wanted to have the video here, but I didn't have the time to queue it all up. But it's you going back and forth with Brandon Tatum, and I loved it because I feel like you really laid it out as a defense instructor and all your credentials, and you said, hey, specifically with the case of Ahmaud Arbery, that was not okay. They went out of their way to pursue someone they had no business pursuing, and someone lost their life. And in that case, you said he was actually the one defending himself. Ahmaud Arbery was the one defending himself based on how the laws to be written, based on what transpired in that situation. This is also similar, not exactly the same, but similar to the Trayvon Martin situation where you got George Zimmerman, pursuing a teenager, and the police are like, don't pursue, right? And there's this weird vigilante justice that we've now seen happen multiple times where folks got no business pursuing this person, and then it's like, what I did self-defense. It's like, no, you were wilding out and you did some wild stuff, and now someone lost their life. And the frustrating part is, and again, I know I'm kind of just flowing here, but the frustrating part is there seems, from not all, because again, God bless you and your voice, and I think we need to promote your voice and voices like yours. But there always seems to be a defense to go to the person who did the shooting, specifically in Ahmaud Arbery, without even looking at the legal ramifications, the facts. It's especially in the George Zimmerman, it was like, well, let the facts come out. It was like, yo, he pursued a teenager after the police told him not to, and then killed the teenager. So my first question to you is, can you just briefly talk about what it means to protect yourself, and that's not okay. Like, those situations are not okay. Because I think what you said in that video to Brandon Tatum, I thought was extremely refreshing, and I got a bigger idea about that I'll come back to. But yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so with Ahmaud Arbery, and in that whole context of even having that conversation was, and for those who watch it, I know there's some people already watched that and they're like, oh, they were attacking him, blah, 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 they came there. Like, he came on his own volition. Like, I don't know what the conversation was with Hotep, Jesus, and Brandon. Have no idea. All I know is that I wanted to have a conversation with other fellow Black conservatives who have been around that atmosphere in general, and wanted to talk about this very real aspect of Ahmaud Arbery that I felt that a lot of people were not handling very well. And it didn't need to be like that. It was honestly like cut and dry. It already had a lot of racist undertones to it. It was very obvious. And then it became, of course, even more obvious in the actual court of law when they found out what they actually said. I don't know if you guys have looked at the updates and follow-ups of them literally looking over him and calling him the N-word in the court of law. So that actually was a racist scenario. And this was before that. So we didn't even know those facts yet, right? So I was just talking about it even as a firearms instructor, not even a gun rights person. I know a lot of the laws, but even just a firearms instructor, I know that I tell my other people that I instruct, my students, that look, depending on the state that you're in, for example, you were talking about George Zimmerman. So that's where the whole stand your ground law comes in, because obviously as a firearms instructor, and even those in the gun rights community, we would say, do not pursue. Do not pursue if you don't need to be. If they're not an immediate threat to you, don't pursue. You don't need to. Even if you have a firearm and you know that they don't, and you're in the upper hand, you do not need to pursue, because morally you don't need to pursue. Yep. I mean, come on. But also it's best for both involved. But then the law says, and it should, because you shouldn't have the duty to retreat, which is what Stand Your Ground says. It says that you do not have to retreat in a situation like that. So that's where people kind of use that and misconstrue it. Ultimately, yes, I believe in the fact that you should not ever have a duty to retreat, but you also have to have wisdom. You also have to have personal responsibility and know that as a human being, you take somebody else's life, you better have a very good reason for yourself. Particularly if you are a Christian, then you're going to be convicted, because that is not something easily done. You don't take someone else's life easily. So there are a lot of layers to that, but particularly as a Christian and a firearms instructor and someone who knows the law, I would not have I wouldn't have been in that situation, but I would not have pursued that. And legally, yes, Ahmaud Arbery, if he were alive, would have had that self-defense argument. He's not alive. So unfortunately, we will never know. But he did have that defense in Georgia. Yeah.
And it's so extremely tragic, that whole situation. Why do you think that when these situations happened, some of the names, and we're not going to mention any names, but some of the names that folks, I think, kind of weaponize their content, usually tend to come out and go, yeah, it was self-defense. Yeah, he had a criminal record. Yeah, he did this. Right. When it's like, fam, on the surface, this is pretty straightforward what this is, right? This is pretty straightforward what happened here, and the way it played out. And I even think in the Ahmaud Arbery situation, I think they waited like 70 days before they actually pressed charges, like the district attorney had to step in.
They actually got away with self-defense themselves first, and that's why it wasn't cool.
Why do you think that the voices being promoted, Black conservative voices, why do you think they tend to be the more radicalized fringe folks that want to smear the victim and just say wild stuff? It's a pattern at this point. It's not, right? Like we could look at it and we could say, hey, Ahmaud Arbery, that ain't right. George Floyd, that ain't right, right? Trayvon Martin, that ain't right. Instead, it's like, yeah, but he stole something from stole Skittles, right? Or whatever. They just dig up something, and that becomes the default narrative. And, you know, I don't want to presume anybody's motives because I don't know those people's hearts, right? But why is the conservative community promoting these voices and not promoting more voices like yours, like Coleonior, who like went and had like objective, reasonable conversations about these things and spoke out for the victim?
Right. And I think that's where you saw the disconnect. I saw particularly because obviously I'm Christian first, but I'm in the space of the 2A space primarily. And so I was listening and hearing what the 2A people were saying more than the conservative mainstream, right? Before I even got into that space.
Yes.
And I will say I was pleasantly surprised, like you said, Coleon. I mean, Coleon tends to be, he's a lawyer by trade anyways, but also knows this space for a while. But also, he's an African-American male in America. He understands that situation. I know people say that and it's already think I'm a leftist already because I said that, the obvious. Right. But he's not going to divorce the very real reality that there are people look at you a different way because of your skin tone and because you're male, period. And for me, actually, personally, I would have said I was even more so. I even said that in that clip with Brandon, but was that before I realized that I was at the time pregnant with my son. I do think something changed in me when I realized that my son will be considered a black son in society, will be considered black male in society. Regardless of his ideology of what he believes, someone at 10 o'clock, at 11 o'clock at night, seeing him and he might happen to not be wearing, I don't know, church clothes, anything less than church clothes, I don't know at this point, is sometimes seen as unfortunately seen as something he can still see as dangerous, unfortunately, in America, or in the world, honestly, that I don't want to be that mother hearing about my son on the other end. I'm thinking about Ahmaud Arbery's mom at that point. I'm thinking about George Floyd's mother at that point. I'm thinking as a human being, as a black woman, as a Christian, but as a gun owner who, by the way, yes, I advocate for gun rights, but doesn't mean that in Texas, although we have open carry and it's legal, right? It's constitutionally supposed to be legal, but it's legal here, that I'm not nervous, that I don't understand the intentions of somebody else looking at me if they think that I'm a threat or not. That's just the reality right now. That's the reality, and I'm not going to change the fact that we need to have more people who look like me outside, open carrying, having a gun, normalizing that culture in order to actually change that perspective of that person. But right now, as it stands, unfortunately, people see you as African American and they see you with a firearm most of the time because they see what they see in the media. They see you as dangerous. And that's the reality right now. And so with that in mind, I want to make sure that I'm making a better future for my son, right? For my son who's now 5 months old. And so that helped my perspective that time to realize that, okay, regardless of all this other stuff, conservatism has nothing to do with this argument of if this guy deserved to be killed or not. Obviously not. He didn't deserve to be killed in this scenario, obviously. And so my conservative solutions have nothing to do with this very real aspect where I feel like people just add conservatism into something that has nothing to do with conservatism.
Yeah, and you alluded to implicit bias a little bit in terms of how, as you know, I'm sure some of you guys don't know, my son is black, half black, my wife is black, right? So it's the same reality that it becomes a bit more personal when you think about what world your child is going to grow up in, right? And how that's actually going to play out, and how dark is his skin tone going to be, right? How is he going to be perceived in society if he's wearing a hoodie at night? All of these different things can and there's only so much you can do to shelter him, but I think the gaslighting from folks on the fringes to just deny like this is even a thing, right? Like, and again, it just bums me out because if we're talking conservatism, if we're talking about gun rights, if we're talking about fiscal conservatism, if we're talking about a lot of the ideas, in my opinion, are the better ideas, right? If the options are like radical leftism and like conservatism that's now kind of becoming more radicalized as well, the options a lot of times are better. However, they're packaged so poorly in the gaslighting and just like flat out like, hey, real example, the what is her name? I always forget her name. The princess, the Margaret.
Oh, Meghan Markle with the whole thing with
Meghan Markle, right? Like I'm like, hey,
right.
If someone says that they received some treatment that was racially biased against them, I've known enough black people in my life to know that that's probably true, right? And the instant, and I don't know her backstory or what she was like as a duchess or as a whatever, right? But the instant thing that comes to life is like, yo, people jump right into Ben Shapiro. I believe she totally made it up. I believe she's totally lying. It's like, why jump to she's lying and she's making it up? Like I don't get that type of thinking from folks on the far right when out there. How do you know? Like, how do you know that she's making it up? How do you know that she's right? You don't really know. So in the same way, they've done a study and they found out that women who are victims of sexual abuse, like the overwhelming majority of them don't make it up. The overwhelming majority of them sacrifice a lot to come out as survivors. I don't get this idea that every time someone who's black or who's Hispanic or whatever has an incident and they come out and they share vulnerably, hey, I experienced this. The gaslighting is, oh, it's all in your head. Oh no, that wasn't racial. Well, how do we know? Well, let's let the facts come out. Well, and then the facts do come out, and the facts do come out, and we're like, fam, clear as day, Ahmaud Arbery, like clear as day, Trayvon Martin, like. Right. It just is so frustrating because I think if we talk ideas, right, and we just talk just strictly ideas, I think a lot of and because listen, I'm in California, guys. I don't know if y'all noticed. Why do I go hard at the right and never talk about the left? Ruslan, you always talk about the right, never about the left. Because I'm in California, the most liberal state, and if we don't get it together, it's gonna become freaking Canada here, where we don't have any rights. And if someone from the right or that's Republican or whatever doesn't rise up and is reasonable and can talk the language of the folks in the middle, it's gonna be a mess. It's gonna only get worse here, and I won't be able to get my PC carbine. I'm joking.
Yeah, when you said California, I was like, ooh, no wonder. I was like, 9 millimeter. Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's bad. Like the laws here are goofy. Governor Newsom is goofy. Like it's some weird stuff. And Canada has no rights in terms of firearms. That's what I was joking at. Canada's great. I love my folks in Canada. But y'all be arresting pastors and like taking grandmas to jail over the lockdown. So let's not act like you guys are the land of liberty here, okay? It's like so. And
the thing is, Canadians have rights too. That's what I was saying. Is like, and we make it seem like, oh, it's American and it's gun rights. Like, no, it's not. It has nothing to do with your nationality or where you're from or what country you're in. It's just that the government in Canada is not protecting Canadians' rights. They have those rights. They're not protected. That's the problem. And I think also you were saying is that it also, when you're coming back to the conservatism, we also are discrediting ourselves. We lack more credibility when we focus on things like that have nothing to do with our actual ideas, like you said, our better ideas. Yep. And we're talking about, why were they there at nighttime? Or why? Do you know about their background before they became a Christian? Particularly George Floyd, that. Of course, Ahmaud Arbery was important to me, and I saw that as a 2A issue, actually myself, probably even less so than a lot of people in the 2A community. But George Floyd was, for me, more about the aspect of those people who say that, particularly in the Reform community, you are a Christian, and you know that because of the blood of Jesus that you are saved and you're redeemed. And I'm not trying to say that the things of that person's past are not important, But what does that have to do with the fact that as a Christian, you should also be grieving for another brother in Christ whose life was taken away? But yet you're talking about things in his past where he's obviously had issues going on. But that is not what, as those of the redeemed, as those who are Christian, going into this mainstream world, we should be the ones, the voices speaking up for another brother in Christ, not try to demonize them. Like, and then at the same time say you're conservative and you're a Christian. Like, that's where I think people get so turned off, because there are people who are conservatives who want to use the Christian title, but they're not acting as Christians in every single scenario. And so that's what I was saying, was that misinterpretation of what it means to be a Christian, a born again believer, and also be a conservative.
Amen. And also be a conservative, that it's not always synonymous, that some...
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so in terms of the Ahmaud Arbery, that costed you something, like practically at Liberty University, which is... I haven't been a fan of Liberty. I haven't been a fan of Jerry Falwell. I just know the history with Jerry Falwell and some of the religious right shenanigans that he's pulled, and the fundamentalism and rebranding that as evangelicalism. And I've never been a fan of him or the folks that, I've had friends that have gone there, and I know what it is. And I've been in Lynchburg. What happened with the situation at Liberty University regarding this whole Ahmaud Arbery thing?
Yeah, so for those, why were you with Falkirk in the first place? I've done a lot of stuff with Turning Point in the past, and this is before Trump as well. And then also with Liberty, I think you think Liberty, it's this big organization, it's big. My husband would say, look, it's a para-church, it's not a church, organization where at least they're trying to do the right thing when it comes to, and what I've seen, a radicalization of people who are trying to do, for example, make it okay to be pro-abortion and be a Christian, right? And so I was concerned about that path, that general path that I'm starting to see within the Christian community, mainstream community, where I was wanting to be more of to spearhead more of those stances that I think are obviously Christian and biblical in scripture. Amen. Particularly, with abortion, even with gun rights, self-defense, etc. So what it became, though, quickly, I found once I joined this fellowship, is it became this whole completely pro-Trump, not even pro-Trump, it was a Trump cheerleading campaign. Okay, that's what Falkirk became very quickly. And so I kind of digressed more and more and kind of left that whole thing a little bit, but I didn't leave completely. It was when I actually talked about Ahmaud Arbery publicly, and here is me, this naive girl thinking this is clear cut. I mean, this is obvious. This is something that everybody can get on board. This is not going to be controversial. Finally, I realized very quickly that that's not true in some cases. And a couple of days after coming out, really essentially just tweeting about it, saying, look, there's obviously some bad things that happen with this. Then I got the call, look, we need to talk. All right, finally talk. Yeah, we're losing funding. Okay, yeah. It was just obvious to the point where it's just look, yeah, okay, right, peace, see ya. If I don't like to make those connections, and I usually don't. Trust me, there are a lot of people in the conservative movement who have burned me in ways similar to that. But when it's that obvious, and then of course Falwell, what happened a few months afterwards. Now someone told me that Falkirk is actually with Charlie Kirk and Falwell, obviously with what happened with Jerry Falwell. They're not connected with Falkirk anymore, and they're trying to rebrand and they have different leadership and whatever, and I hope that goes well. But yeah, it became this Trump cheerleading, rah, and obviously it was also something where if you spoke about Ahmaud Arbery, you spoke about George Floyd in a way that they didn't deem biblical justice, which they have their own views of what that looks like, then you were blacklisted and pushed out. So that's what happened to me.
Gosh, what a bummer. What a bummer. Oh man, it's so frustrating. Because it's like you said, the Ahmaud Arbery, George, these are humanitarian issues that we should all be able to be that's not right. that's bad. Let's fix it, right? And then when you look at even some of the proposals that are coming out with laws like a duty to intervene law, right? Where the good cop has to intervene when the bad cop does something bad, right? Like these are reasonable proposals, I feel like, specifically from the 8 Can't Wait. But my theory, and you could push back on this if you want, my theory is when the church, whether they're conservatives or not, fail to lead on an issue or fail to give voice to an issue, and whether that's pro-life, whether that's sex trafficking, whether that's police brutality, whatever that issue is, when we forfeit our right to step in and have conversation and to lead, what happens is then the world steps in with their own logic, and then you get stuff like we want to disrupt the nuclear family, right? And people are so polarized about that. And I'm like, yeah, but these are spiritually dead people trying to lead other spiritually dead people. And the church, by and large, has been silent. And by the way, they were silent when Dr. King marched. Like, we think that we were like a part of the evangelicals, were a part of the civil. No, that was primarily the black church. And Billy Graham later on in his life had to repent because he was so apathetic about civil rights and about the vision that Dr. King had. And what happened to Dr. King? He too was dismissed as a communist, a Marxist, and all these shenanigans. And it's like, I think the difference was in that context, there was more Christians leading than today. And it seems like today we've just taken a back seat. And if it's not abortion, then we really don't care about whatever this social issue is. And it's heartbreaking.
That's a social justice we're allowed to talk about.
Yeah. And then you get otherized. You get otherized, right? Like I'm called a cultural Marxist weekly for just speaking out about racism. For like, oh, you're a cultural Marxist. It's like, no, fam. Like, no. Like, I'm a capitalist. Like, I come from a communist nation. Like, I was born in a communist nation. And so I think it's such a bummer because, like you said, these are very straightforward human dignity issues. It seems like the Republican Party is turning a corner with the last CPAC and some of the faces they had there, and the whole illustration of like, you don't send Carlton to the hood, you send Will Smith to the hood.
Homage Toure.
Yeah. Do you see hope in terms of how we could have more balance? Because I feel like if they stay on this trajectory, like, they've lost a culture war. Like, if the face of this movement is going to be Ben Shapiro, Tatum, and Candace Owens, like, it's a wrap. Like, the rest of the folks that are in the middle and lean left aren't gonna rock with that, right? So do you see hope, and do you think that we're going to progress as folks that lean conservative or are conservative?
Yeah, I think I think it's really going to come down to the issues, right? Like, so the single issue people who don't have, an idea, like, want to run for office in the future. Like, I think it's a lot of that set up. And again, like the same thing, like what happened with Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, I honestly could see a very distinct difference between those who were trying to just essentially just preach to the choir and just get their base riled up and had no goal of actually reaching those outside of their little bubble, right? And those who were actually trying to reach outside of their bubble, who were doing outreach.
Yes.
I was like, look, I got flack for this, and I was essentially, it's like, look, I'm a director of outreach, and when you do outreach, it's pretty simple. Look, just don't try to demean the people you're trying to reach. When we're actually doing outreach and we're demeaning those same people by looking like, well, the African-American culture, the Black culture does this, and, your men do this, and of course this is going to happen. But hey, yeah, we're trying to do some type of exit from the party that you're in. Come over here because we're going to treat you like human beings. People aren't stupid. They're not going to come over there. They're not, and not only that, but you piss them off. Hence why Georgia is now a blue state and not a red state. But I digress on that one. Okay, you got to piss up a lot of people to turn a red state into a blue state. And I'm in Texas, so who knows what's going to happen
next. Texas almost went blue. Everybody from California moving there.
You piss off a lot of people. Like, there are a lot of people who are just like, look. But the thing is, Texas is a refugee state. I like to say, from California, and a lot of Californians actually, if you look at even like Reagan time and something like. California used to be a Texas. California actually had a lot of conservative leaning. And then there are things like that where just like what we've been seeing lately, where people are actually moving from one place to another because they're sick and tired of the politics that they have in their own state. Yeah. But yeah, that's pretty much it. We need more Maj Touré. Maj Touré is the one who put that whole thing together.
So you, first generation, second generation Nigerian?
It depends on what you think of first generation. First generation to be born and raised here.
Okay, so you were born and raised here. I was born. I was born in communist Soviet Union, Azerbaijan, Baku. I on your PragerU video, you talked about how your values and a lot of values of immigrants, a lot of values in the Black community, in most communities, tend to be more conservative values, right? And you described the values you had growing up. And can you talk about briefly those, like in terms of growing up as a first generation? So your parents were born there, you were born here. And what was what was like your framework growing up?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, and it actually, pre-research actually shows even African Americans that the majority are moderate or conservative. Even those who are in the Democrat Party. So those who think, oh, they have all the leftist ideas, like, no, most of them are like me, regardless if you're an immigrant or not. But as a Nigerian, first generation immigrant, I would say, my family was very much so, I mean, born Roman Catholic, pro-life was ingrained in us, even being fiscally conservative, that you don't depend on the government. Because look, the government's not going to be there for you. So why would you depend on the government? It makes complete sense for those who are fleeing governments where they're oppressive, where you don't know if the police officers are going to come and help you. You might have to bribe them if they do. So that's where my family was coming from. They were leaving that to come to America. And so that makes sense that just by being selective in that sense, that we were going to have more conservative people who are here who have those values. And so that's kind of what I grew up with. Second Amendment, all those type of things, guns. I mean, that wasn't something they had at all in Nigeria. So that wasn't even in the forefront of my mind until college, until me being a sexual assault survivor and realizing that if I wanted to defend myself, protect myself, I had to do that for other women as well. But that was more of an American value, right? It wasn't something I grew up with. I didn't have guns in the home, etc. For the most part, though, I believed in a nuclear family. I believed, being a good Christian Igbo woman was important in Nigerian culture. So that was what I grew up with. So it's pretty natural to me. So
we would agree that if you're growing up an immigrant, we would agree that if you're going to have a good amount of conservative values, right? Why does it seem, and I'm going to say it seems because I don't want to speak on it. Why does it seem like when the folks from the conservative side speak, they present these ideas like revolutionary, groundbreaking ideas as if there's a monopoly on them, right? Like personal responsibility, like protect yourself, don't be a victim, don't depend on the government, right? Like why? Because it almost seems patronizing. Like it almost seems like really, like you think that folks want to be victims? You think that folks want to depend on the government? You think folks don't want to take responsibility, right? And it just seems bizarre that I listen to like a Ben Shapiro and he talks and it's like, bro, these aren't like revolutionary ideas. This is common sense more or less. But it seems like because the left has gone so wonky in the way they've branded it, that it seems new, but it's not. And there's this disconnect of packaging that's happening, I feel like. What are your thoughts on that? I know I just said a whole lot. Sorry, my questions aren't super linear. This is more conversational.
No, my answers aren't super linear either, so it's okay. For the most part, I think, there was a lot on that one. I would say starting from what you were saying in the beginning, like I think for the most part, yeah, you're right. And I'm gonna admit, I definitely have been that person too. Like, man, I decided when I was gonna be responsible for my own, issues or whatever, that, I'm gonna become a conservative. Okay, maybe so, but I think it's that leap between being a conservative, which I think a lot of people might be okay with, and then saying, well, if you're a conservative, you have to be a Republican, right? And then they see the hypocrisy of things like, okay, you say you're fiscally conservative. How much debt did we, in the last administration, did we add to the national debt? Okay. All right. On gun rights, like you say that you're pro Second Amendment, but we literally don't have bump stocks anymore because you decided that wasn't something we're allowed to have. I digress. I could go on to that. But there are different issues, like I was saying, issue by issue that people are seeing and seeing the hypocrisy there, right? It's the same thing that we get as a Christian, right? We get a lot of people who are like, oh, yeah, you say you're a Christian, but on this, like that's more important than, homosexuality is more important than adultery, right? Like in sinning. Like you're not living out the values that you say that you have. And so I think that's the biggest thing, is that people see that hypocrisy there, where they say if you're conservative or you believe in these values, right, that are freedom values, you must therefore be in this box. But that box tends to, when they want to, use it for their gain or not, right? Police are great until, well, the fact that if you're pro-gun and pro-Second Amendment and you're actually against a tyrannical government, who do you think is going to enforce those laws at the end?
Yeah.
It's not going to be back the blue at that time, is it?
Right.
So things like that, where people are noticing people want to use conservatism when it suits them and not across the board, is what turns a lot of people off, I see. And I used to be on the left, so I understand what turns people off.
Yeah.
So so
good.
this is me remembering old Antonia and realizing that, that I probably would have been like completely turned off by that.
Yeah.
So I think that's what a lot of it is.
That's good. My buddy Zach Sparazzo, who works with me, has a good question. He wanted me to ask you this. He said, this is interesting. He said, should Christian gun owners, he too is a new one, give up their guns if the government tried to take them away? Conservatives would say no, but Christians should obey the laws of the land, right?
Romans 13.
Yeah, Romans 13.
Yeah.
There's some tension there, right? Because it's like, follow the leaders and the rulers. But we have this right to protect ourselves. How do you live in that tension?
Man, that's a hard one. I'm by no means a theologian, my husband's a pastor. That doesn't just go by osmosis or anything. I don't know everything. But I will say with that, I would also look at the Old Testament and the fact that he calls us over and over again to be a part of combating injustice, to be a part of those who are oppressed, right? Yeah. Those who are oppressed. If you're being oppressed by a government or whatever entity, right, then we have a duty as Christians to be against oppression, whether that's slavery, and by the way, gun control was a huge form of oppression, particularly against African Americans in history. Slave laws, slave codes, black codes, Jim Crow laws. I would argue, even if you notice, a lot of gun ownership or gun restrictions are in urban areas, right? I.e. a lot of predominantly African American areas today in America. So those are also forms of oppression, and we should be on the side of making sure that those people have the means to get out of oppression. And history shows, not even if the African Americans, Jews before the Holocaust, Germany, actually Adolf Hitler put a whole slew of gun control restrictions, particularly for the Jewish people, because he knew what he was going to do a few years down the line. And it's very hard to oppress any group of people when they have the means and the weaponry to defend themselves. So that's what I would say.
That's good. Okay. So when we talk about defending ourselves against a tyrannical government, potentially, do you think with the advancements that we've seen in the military now, that it's even feasible for a militia to rise up? I'm speaking in hypotheticals because I don't think this is going to happen, but do you even think it's possible in context, right? Like when that was written hundreds of years ago, Do you think that's even a reality that, like, you know, because they got some pretty advanced weaponry in our military, but if it was military versus militias with, you know, even AR-15s, like, is that even a fair comparison now?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's exactly why, when I was talking about earlier on in the conversation about why it's important, first of all, we know it's a human right and not a constitutional right, but also what this Second Amendment says, that it is a right for us to keep and bear arms. It doesn't say what type of arms, right? By the way, like, arms, if you actually look up arms, it doesn't mean, oh, well, that 9mm handgun, that's an arm. No. An arm, look, an arm means, yes, everything that the military has is an arm. That's just what it says in the Constitution, okay? I'm not even talking about the human right aspect of it. But the reason why it's important for people to know that the Second Amendment, if you read it, right, a well-regulated militia, by the way, regulated doesn't have anything to do with the government. It means a well-trained militia. Militia has nothing to do with the government as well. So if you are a group of people, 2-3 people, and you say that you're there to defend your area, your family, your home, your community, and you have arms, that's a well-regulated militia. That's a well-trained militia. Nothing to do with the government. Nothing to do with the government telling me you have a right for a militia or not to have a militia. And then you go to keep and bear arms. So that aspect of things shows that it's not, even though it's great to have self-defense, that's important. I'm an advocate for self-defense. I'm an advocate for hunting. That's great.
Yes.
But the Second Amendment has nothing to do with those two things. They're great, has nothing to do with that. The point of the Second Amendment is to show that the government has no right to tell you which arms you can possess. Why is that important to know? Because if something like the American Revolution happens again, which it happened before, so it could absolutely happen again, right? We're simple human beings. If it happens again in the future, and we're trying to prevent that, then it's important that we have the same arms to make sure that we can actually be equal, right, in a situation like the American Revolution. So that means, no, civilians are not supposed to focus on if you're looking actually on the Second Amendment, are not supposed to have distinct differences in arms on what we can carry and what the military can carry. And so that's why so many people are confused about, oh, well, you're not going to, you know, end the military if they actually go against you with your AR-15 or your semi-automatic. By the way, that's because there's gun control laws that's happened in the last few decades that have actually kept us from having those same type of arms. We've had them historically for a long time, but the last few years, AR-15s now are like the big enemy, the scary thing. And so they're looking to stop those and stop civilians from carrying those. But the AR-15 is actually a civilian version of the M4, which is what the military actually carries. And AR-15 has no ability to become fully automatic. So that means once you pull the trigger once, one round comes out. Right. That's it. Same thing as your 9mm Glock 19. So that's really the equivalent of that. It's no different.
Thank you for clarifying that. So from your position, you would want folks to have all of the same weapons, like tanks and helicopters and like full-on automatic weapons. Like, you think
keep
that
and bear arms. It's so
interesting.
And that's keep and bear arms.
Interesting.
And again, the thing is, though, for example, people, well, you don't want someone with a tank. Like, so just because I have a tank doesn't mean automatically that means, you know what, I have a tank now. I wasn't going to be violent before I had this tank, but now that I have a tank, this is a great time for me to be violent. Like, it's not going to change the person's intent with that weapon just because they have some form of higher weaponry, right?
Interesting.
Just because it's more powerful doesn't mean that I somehow stop being a Christian, start being convicted, stop being someone who is trying to do the right thing, and also obviously someone who's not violent as well, right? And so that's why it's important that people remember that it's not the actual weapon that you have in your hand, it's that person behind that weapon, but that person behind that trigger who's going to make a decision of if they're using that to defend people's lives. And we do that, and we know people like that, right? Police officers do that every single day. They have firearms in their hands every single day, and we know that they're not going to use it for evil or for harm for most of the time.
Yes.
So it comes down to that person behind that firearm.
Yes. So that's what I hear from, folks who are 2A people, which I agree with because of where we are currently, right? Where we are currently in society, right? So the only way to protect us from bad guys is to give the good guys firearms, which, yeah, that's why I want to get my conceal and carry. I get that. Is what you're describing, though, possible with the amount of mental health issues that we have, with the amount of lack of education that people have who do get firearms, right? And so I used to be like, yo, we should have regulations for firearms. And then I went and bought a firearm and I was like, this is a cumbersome, goofy process. I already bought one. Now I got to go back and wait another 10 days. I really do understand how silly some of these laws are. But my question is if everybody's walking around strapped, hypothetically, right? And I don't live in an open carry state, right? But if everybody's walking around with a gun on their waist, does that actually make us a safer and more polite society? Or does it escalate things quicker? And when things do get escalated, now you're not talking about a fist fight or a scuffle or stabbing. You're talking about somebody potentially getting murdered or getting killed, right? And we see this in Atlanta. I love hip hop music, and they say that the difference in Atlanta is this is the theory. Atlanta tends to be more unified as a hip hop community because everybody has weapons. Things can escalate really quickly. And so folks don't even beef like that. And when they do beef, someone gets killed. It's right away, right? And there tends to be there is no we're just going to casually talk crap to each other on social media. No, we're pulling up and spraying your whole studio up, right? And there's been multiple rappers that have gotten killed because of this kind of stuff. So how do we reconcile that, right? We see the far side of that. I don't know if the solution's always give the good guys more firearms, right? If you're living in an environment where anybody can get it and it can escalate really quick and someone can die. And again, because I pay attention to the hip hop genre, it seems to be very prevalent there. What are your thoughts on that?
Right. And I try to be hesitant to when I say good guys, bad guys,
sure,
right? Particularly as a Christian. Sure. Because there's no good guys, bad guys.
Yes.
We're all sinners, right?
Agreed. Yes.
So it depends. So it's just we know we're all sinners then I know that I'm not going to, if someone hands me some type of, I have a firearm, right? I'm a gun owner, right? Mm-hmm. And I've done nothing with it to harm somebody else. Because guess what? Even if it were legal or illegal, I wouldn't be doing that. Right? So, and people say, well, that's too simple. It is that simple, though. Because there are, like you said, 8 million new gun owners last year. And guess what? Look at the FBI statistics every single year and see if it's going up or going down when it comes to crime. It's actually going down every year when it comes to crime. But yet we have more guns. We have what? I think they said, we don't know what the census is, but we do know how many guns we have, which is interesting. We have over 400 million guns in America. Okay? The census is not out yet, but the last census said we had about 300 million. So we have more guns than we have people in America, right? And if you're looking at FBI statistics, look at 2019's FBI statistics. More people were killed by hands, hammers, and clubs than they were rifles. 2019. Go look it up right now, FBI statistics. Yeah. So more people are killed by those things than actual firearms. And the firearms that do kill, unfortunately, are those who pull the trigger because of suicide. Like you said, we have an issue when it comes to mental health. Yeah. That's something that we have to deal with. And the gun community, the Second Amendment community has to stop making it a taboo issue in order for us to actually lead in that area. Because that's what you were saying with the race conversation. If we decide that's a taboo topic, then we're not leading, we're not talking, and people outside of that space make the solutions, and we're not part of that conversation. So that's what the 2A community has done for a long time. And unfortunately, we're trying to catch up now. We're doing a little bit better, but we're trying to catch up. So, I mean, that's a long, convoluted way of saying it comes down to that. Like, we're sinners. We know that as Christians. And so it really does come down to that person, that individual. But the stats even show that just because you have a gun in your hand or you're a firearm owner doesn't mean automatically you become violent. And also people are not killing other people with firearms at a rate that's as high as or even higher than hands, hammers, and clubs.
That's good. Okay. That's interesting. Okay. So yeah, I'm watching the chat. Some people are pushing back and they're like,
that's okay. Come on.
Yeah. So
whatever. I mean,
yeah. No. I mean,
what's the pushback?
I think it seems like the pushback is like from a Christian worldview. How does someone, want more weapons, yet we're called to kind of like lay down our lives if we are to be persecuted? Jesus laid down his life. The apostles were brutally murdered. It seems like some of that, I get it. Like y'all could go off the martyr vibes. Like I'm not gonna be martyred. You know what I'm saying? If I could do something about it, like that's not what America is, right? Like I think we make those statements, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but because I think we make those statements forgetting how much we're influenced by Christian values in our society, the value of autonomy, the value of private property rights. These are all scriptural values, the value of equality, everybody being an image bearer of God. And so we don't live in Rome, right? We don't live with the same rights as Paul did or lack of rights that they lived with, right? We live in a different world that's influenced by a lot of the scriptures that we follow and we adhere to. And yes, we are a secular nation. We're not a theocracy, right? But that we still are influenced by Christian values. And so I don't know if you want to chime in on that, but I'm kind of getting that a lot. Like, what do you mean? Like, we're supposed to just be humble, meek servants and Jesus turned the other cheek. Go ahead.
Well, the thing is, we can still be humble, meek servants. That has nothing to do with the fact that if somebody is trying to harm me and my child, and I have to go that route, if they're, I'm a gun owner, yes, but I also have other means that are non-lethal. And if I have to go that route, I will go that route. And to the point where I know that the only way that person is going to stop trying to harm me or my family is if I have to use some type of lethal force, right?
Yep.
I think, and they're well-meaning, and I understand that. I do understand that. But it's not saying that you have to go that route. No one's saying you have to go that route. In fact, as a firearms instructor, like I said before, if you're able to get out of that situation unharmed, no one even knows that you were there, that's 99% of the situation or the scenario that I would want you to be in. Get out. Even if you have a gun, get out. Right? But if you can't get out and someone is intent on harming you or someone else that you care about, and that is your last resort, there are places that will not say that in fact, there are places who will say that you don't have a right to self-defense, i.e. England. And if you use a gun in self-defense, you can't use that as a reason why you used it. So guess who's going to prison after you're trying to protect you and your family? You are, not the criminal.
Wow.
You are. And so that is what we're trying to defend, is that we are in a place where if you have to make that decision, you are legally protected and you're not going to prison after that.
That's good. That's really good. I love that. I think you're spot on. I think the what I loved about what you said is it's a last resort, right? You in this specifically with
Absolutely.
when that Brandon Tatum video, you said, hey, as a firearms instructor, we're saying, like if you're in a grocery store with your child and there's a situation, look for the way out. Don't pursue, right? That's literally what the whole thing is. You're responsible for every bullet that comes out of your firearm.
Absolutely.
I love that. And I think maybe folks don't get that. Maybe folks have this caricature of everybody who's a gun owner, that they're just walking around with all this pent up testosterone, just looking for trouble. I got my strap on me. What's up? Right. And it's like, no, that's a movie. Like, that's not real. Right. Like, that's not how that, I don't know any gun owners like that. Right. So this someone posed the question of like, how does owning a gun make you a peacemaker? Right. And it's like, well, because you understand the force that you have behind that firearm, right? And that it's 100% a last resort. It's like folks who know mixed martial arts, like really know mixed martial arts. They're often the most gentle, the most humble, because they know they can literally snap your neck and kill you if they wanted to. So I think oftentimes we assume that when someone has the capacity or the ability to do something that they will, when it's usually the opposite, right? It's usually the opposite.
Right. And I think that's why it's important that I'm not saying, oh, well, maybe they don't think I'm a good example of a gun owner. That's fine. But I think I was telling you before, the stats show that Black women are the fastest growing. They're the fastest growing demographic of gun owners in America. They've been way before Trump, guys. They wouldn't make it about Trump. Been doing this for almost a decade now, and Black women are still the fastest growing. So you're trying to tell me other Black women, by the way, who still politically vote a certain way, right? So you're telling me all these Black women, and including me, right, that we just have these pent up testosterone, just trying to use our gun, like that's what you're saying when you make these statements. And I think it's important. Like, the statistics show that it's not what TV wants you to believe. It's the white male who's angry, who's trying to use it against some other person. If anything, history has shown that it is the gun control person that is actually racist, who doesn't want that other African American person to, why? Of course, logically, not to protect themselves. Wow. So I can give you example after example. MLK sought to get a permit twice, was denied by a racist police officer twice from getting his concealed carry permit. Wow. I mean, all of that goes to show that he was trying to protect himself and his home, and other people in the movement, the civil rights movement, try to do the same thing as well. Yeah.
Someone brought up the situation in Texas where that church shooting happened. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. Where, that thing was neutralized because someone had a firearm.
They had a rifle.
They had a rifle. Yeah. Do you think these situations happen more often than we know, and they just don't get the media attention, where sometimes a situation is mitigated and neutralized because someone does have a firearm?
To answer that, we had a whole year in 2020. Did we have any big mass shootings on TV that anybody was talking about?
No, not in 2020.
You think they just stopped having mass shootings?
No. I don't know. You tell me. It seems like a lot of folks were in the house in 2020. No, we had plenty
of mass shootings.
Did we really?
Yeah.
Wow, yeah, okay.
Absolutely. Mass shootings considered, for the FBI, is considered 3 or more casualties.
Okay.
Right? So you're not going to see a lot of that in the news. You're not going to see a lot of that locally. When they do, it depends on when the media wants to report on it or not. Unfortunately, it's a lot of posturing. It's a lot of when they decide that's going to be important or not. It's a lot of news cycle stuff, to be really blunt. When they decide it's going to be. COVID was the number one thing to talk about last year. Obviously, life did not stop. Obviously, sinning did not stop. Obviously, the evil people didn't stop doing evil things. And yes, they did it with firearms, and they did it with other things as well. Actually, domestic violence went up last year. In fact, sexual assault went up last year. A lot of those things we didn't hear about, but they did continue. So yes, it has to do more with what's going to be covered, and that's what we see. Doesn't mean that they stop happening. So that's unfortunately the truth with that.
That's good. Okay. Wow. I think that's a really good point. Yeah, and I think the logic, I don't know, it just seems like common sense, man. Like, I'd rather be caught with one than without one. I'd rather be in a position to protect myself, my family. If something goes down, than without one. And that's not me as like some expert. Like, I'm still learning. I'm super new. Like, I'm memorizing the 3 gun law, the rules of gun. What are they called? The 3 gun safety laws,
gun
right?
Safety, yeah.
Yeah, like, I'm still learning to this stuff. But I think, logically speaking, if the world is in a very potentially in a dark place, and I think we don't quite understand how barbaric the world can be, right? Like, how wild things can get, because we have it so nice as Americans. But when you see more things with mental health, I think we forget that, like, it can get real really fast. And yes, statistically speaking, the likelihood of any of us being in any of the situations are low. However, I would want to be in a position to protect myself, my family. That's not incongruent with being a Christian. Like, y'all really reading these verses out of context if you think Jesus was literally like, yeah, if someone rolls up in your house and wants to kill you, let them do it, and let them take your wife as their own. And, like, that's not what that verse is saying, guys. Like, that's very wonky and toxic theology that you're you're not understanding the literary devices that he's using when he's saying stuff like turn the other cheek. What was the concept of being slapped in the cheek? Like, you're literally just reading a verse on face value and assuming that he's saying just let anybody have their way with you. And that's not what that's saying. Like, first of all, read the context of what it meant to be slapped on your cheek. That was more of a shaming, I'm flexing on you thing, less of a I'm enforcing harm on you. So you're reading the scripture out of context, and then you're also ignoring the literary devices that are being used, like hyperbole, right? That it's not, everything isn't, when Jesus says, if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out, he doesn't literally mean to pluck it out. Just like if he says, hey, if someone shoots you in the chest, let him shoot you in the head too. That's not what that verse means. Like, you guys are, you know what I'm saying? I don't know if you want to touch on that, but it seems like there's some really wonky theological views on this that I thought we covered it with the Luke passage, Luke 22 verse 36. I thought that made it very clear, like, hey, if you ain't got a sword, sell your cloak, go get one, right? That's what I did. I went and got one. I got two.
Yeah, well, I think the thing is, it's not like I'm not surprised, like, oh, look, I was the same way. I didn't shoot a gun until I was 25. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until it was personal for me, when it was about, man, I'm really by myself when it comes down to, no one's going to come and save me, at 10 o'clock at night, walking home from my school that's, in the rural area, or not rural, residential area. But I know on my cell phone that I just got a couple of alerts that someone just sexually assaulted a classmate in the parking lot, not too far away from where I am. Like, things like that, when you realize that stuff can happen to you, and if it has actually happened to you, I think that's why a lot of sexual assault survivors understand that concept of like you're saying, like, look, we should know, especially as Christians, mm-hmm. that this world is a sinful world and there's evil running rampant in it. Yeah. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand it that type of way until it happens to them. And so that's my individual reason for why I'm in this space, is because I want to make sure that you don't have to wait until that moment to even use the firearm in their situation. I want you to prepare to be educated, to have the muscle awareness, to be already aware of how to use something if that situation happens, and be completely prepared for that situation. So I think that's the issue, is that we need to do that before that scenario happens, not at the time up, and especially not after that. That's why I do the things I do.
I think you mentioning that you were a victim of sexual abuse. I was molested as a kid. I think maybe folks just don't know what it's like to be helpless in a situation, mm-hmm. and how that feels. Like, even my son, and it wasn't a big deal, but like, we had this situation at church where like he felt like he was bullied, right? And for him, and I don't know if the kid was really bullying him or they were just playing and my son misinterpreted. I don't know the particulars, but for him, he came home and he my son is 6, started training, like I'm training every day. He went from doing 3 pull-ups to doing 4 pull-ups in a week, right? He's 6, and there's something in him that instinctually went, I need to be able to prepare myself, to protect myself, right, if it were to go down. At 6, he's having these thoughts. Imagine if you are the victim of sexual abuse. Imagine if you are in a place where you are completely helpless. Maybe that's not your paradigm right now, some of you guys watching this, but that's a lot of folks' paradigm, is like, yo, I don't ever want to be in a spot where I can't protect myself, can't protect my family. So that's maybe folks are disconnected from that reality of how dark things can really get when might is right, and someone who is bigger has an advantage and can just completely brutalize somebody else. I don't know. I think it's different, and it's probably different for women too. I think that's something that I probably don't factor in, is like, as a woman, it probably feels different to walk, to your car from the grocery store, right, at night, when the sun's set, right? Like, it probably feels, and I don't like my wife going out late at night, right, to run an errand. I'm like, where you going? Like, I'll go run, make Instacart. Like, what are you doing? So can you speak on that? Like, as a woman, the reality of that, especially having gone through what you've gone through, is probably, I don't want to say amplified, but is just more real than the average person that's just never experienced any type of trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a big reason why I even got more into that space. Again, like I said, I didn't shoot a gun until I was 25. Didn't even think that was plausible for me until college, when I was more in this space of wanting to empower other women through like the feminist circles and female empowerment circles, talking about domestic violence, talking about sexual assault. In 2012, 2011, I'm sure there's a lot of people who knew, but Obama did this really big national campus sexual assault survey and study. And a lot of people found out that their own college campuses weren't like the safe bastions that they thought, or that they're trying to sell to you, is that there were people on their campus that they may even have known that were assaulted on campus, right? And so through that avenue, I realized that if I really wanted to look at every scenario, right, and which a lot of people do in those spaces, then we should talk about, if somebody is going to use a firearm against me, even if I don't have a firearm, how can I be safe in that scenario? Well, where maybe I can get away from that person knowing the mechanics of a firearm, but also say that person loses that firearm and I'm able to use it. So like situations like that, or even more so, you have your own firearm, that's probably the best situation, right? And you know how to use it. So even being in that space of wanting to prepare women, and not just the fact that most of the time in those situations, you're not even going to the firearm. Most of the time, I'm telling women about situational awareness. The fact that someone who's trying to do harm to you is seeking you out. Unfortunately, this is how it is. The criminal is seeking you out to do the most harm in the least amount of time, right? So they're going to go to that person that they know that they can do the most harm in the least amount of time, that they can get away with it. And so they're going to go to that woman who's going into the parking lot late at night. They're going to go to that, even person, individual, it doesn't have to be a woman, but if they know that they have some type of upper hand, they're going to pursue that person. And so I even tell other women that I train and that I help in scenarios, and I tell them, look, if you're in the parking lot late at night, you don't even have your gun with you. Keep your head up high, walk straight to your car or your vehicle, make sure that you're aware of your surroundings. And that alone, unfortunately, because of how criminals are, they're not going to be seeking you because you are aware. That's called situational awareness. And that's the first thing that I teach anyone before I even talk about firearms.
That's good.
So that's something that I didn't even understand or even was a part of those conversations until I was getting firearms training, right? Or getting training of any sort. It doesn't have to be with the firearm. It could be Krav Maga, right? It could be any type of martial arts or anything that uses self-defense as a vehicle to defend yourself. So it's a mentality that unfortunately has been almost reserved for those who are trying to get into that mental headspace, that unfortunately, particularly women, are not we're not groomed, we're not conditioned to be in those spaces until it's too late. And so that's just something I've learned in the years that I've been training.
Yeah, that's good. The situational awareness is really good. And I grew up in a pretty rough area, so I think I kind of had some of that just intrinsically, like having been jumped and beat up, right. I think you just become more aware. I think that's so good, and I think that's so practical. I think I want to get some questions from you guys that are in the chat, so we're going to do some questions. Don't ask Googleable questions, please, and don't try to get us with the trick the Christian questions, like, well, what if you were in Iraq? What would you do? Just consider our context, consider helpful questions, and so we're going to get to that. I think as a big idea, my big takeaway for this is that it's that quote, right? Some people are so heavenly minded that they are of no earthly good, right? Some of you guys are so heavenly minded that you don't understand the hedge that owning a firearm can have as a protection against your family. Some of you are so heavenly minded that you don't understand the benefit of being financially literate so that you're not a slave to debt and you're not living hand to mouth. Some of you guys are so heavenly minded that you've stopped taking care of your bodies and you've let yourself go. And if something were to go down, you would have your screen just went black. You would have no ability to even attempt to defend yourself, right? So don't be so heavenly minded that you're of no value to the tangible things on this side of eternity. Remember that Jesus prayed for God's kingdom to be on earth as it is in heaven. Let your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So a lot of you guys are just so in the clouds, and you're not being pragmatic about life. And so when someone presents you a different point of view, like, hey, like, you might want to, take care of your finances and not be a goof financially. You might want to take care of your body and not be a uber with your body and walk around here and eat whatever you want. You might want to protect yourself or be trained up in how to protect yourself, whether that's physical combat, owning a firearm to protect your home. And you guys just don't get it. It just whoosh, goes right over your head, and you're of no earthly good. You literally just have no pragmatic approach to life, and you think you're doing it in the name of Jesus and spirituality, but you're not. That's actually Gnostic thinking, where you believe everything about the world that's material and physical is bad, and everything about our spiritual stuff is good. No. We're in a material, physical world. Jesus became a material, physical human, stepped on this side of eternity, and lived the life we couldn't live, and died the death that we should have died, so that we can experience a piece of heaven on earth and go to heaven in the afterlife. So this whole idea is just so, y'all just, I don't know, y'all need like a life skills course or something, because it's so daunting. I'm like, wait, what? So anyway, questions. Let's get some good questions. It seems like a lot of folks like the conversation. I think the stuff you've pointed out in terms of the 2A stuff is really helpful, and I think a lot of folks should educate themselves on it, and just at the very least, like, be able to defend your family, be able to defend yourself, right? Like, maybe you don't run out and buy a firearm tomorrow. Actually, don't do that, because we're having trouble just getting bullets right now. So don't do that, right? Because you guys are driving me nuts. But consider that. Okay, so we got a question. Do the gun laws and the technicalities of owning differ from state to state? And if so, what are the possibilities of a criminal case being taken against a gun owner in certain circumstances? Yeah, it is different from state to state. All the laws don't work the same. You want to touch on that? You're probably, you're the expert.
Yeah. So I couldn't really go into every single state's different technicalities when it comes to that. There are a lot, and that's why you should know your state-specific gun laws, even your city-specific when it comes to the gun laws and where you can carry and where you can't carry. But yeah, like I was saying about stand your ground, that's also when it comes down to the self-defense aspect of it. There's certain states that have certain ways of saying, okay, look, for example, Texas, the castle doctrine. Castle doctrine here is very different than the castle doctrine in Colorado, for example. A castle in Texas is considered your home, your dwelling, right? And also your vehicle. In Colorado, castle doctrine is only considered your home, your dwelling, and even more so in Colorado, where they have outdoor garages, it is only the actual garage that is part of your indoor dwelling. So if you have an outdoor garage, that's not your dwelling. You have an indoor garage and it encompasses your space that you actually live in, that's a castle doctrine dwelling, right? Your vehicle, unless you live in it, not your castle in Colorado. In Texas, that's your castle. So even just minutia stuff like that, that's how, and that's all to say that if you get arrested, which most of the time you probably will, when you get arrested after using your firearm in self-defense, yes, you still get arrested because they have to figure out if it used in self-defense.
Wow. You
have a defense depending on your state, right? If you use it in self-defense in your dwelling in Colorado, you use it in your outdoor garage, that's not your dwelling. You don't have an automatic self-defense case right there, right? You're in Texas, that's your dwelling. You have an automatic self-defense case. So Florida, duty to retreat, like I was saying, stand your ground. Stand your ground says that you do not have a duty to retreat. That means if you don't retreat in a situation where you don't have stand your ground, you are automatically can't use a self-defense scenario. You're automatically looking at everything else outside of self-defense, murder one, like all those types of things. So that's why it's so important that we have things that are protecting people like us who, when we do have a scenario where we're using self-defense, we're not the one who's going to prison. We're not the one, like you were saying, probably in civil court or criminal court, where sometimes even the criminal can be actually suing you in civil court, which that happens a lot actually because you use your gun in self-defense and they're stuck with hospital bills. Yeah. So things like that is why a lot of us are fighting to make sure that the right people in that scenario are the ones who are not coming out as the criminals. So and
you having to have insurance, right? USCCA. Right. That is definitely something that I'm gonna get once I get my conceal carry. I think is very smart. Someone asked, how do you change the narrative? Sorry, there's a lot of questions coming in. Change the false narrative and stigma surrounding the discussion of 2A, which, I mean, that's kind of what we're doing. Like, a lot of folks think that, like, I lean left, but don't know that I'm a 2A person. You know what I mean? So I think that's kind of what's happening here. What are your thoughts on how the narrative and the stigma? There are people on
the left who like guns too. There are socialists for socialists of gun owners or whatever. There's different groups of different people on the left and the right. It doesn't matter. But sorry. I think, well, there you go. I think that's one of the things is that we do is that we stop acting like people in the 2A are, even those in the Second Amendment community, act like the only people who can be in the Second Amendment are those who are going to vote, whatever that means, vote for our gun rights, right? Like I said, okay, guys, this is, I mean, you guys are not going to like me on the right now. I'm on the right. I'm going to let you guys know. Obama in 2008, actually, in 2008, Obama, before 2012, when it got really bad with Sandy Hook, he actually is the reason why we're able to carry firearms concealed in national parks. Yeah, he passed a bill allowing that to happen, okay? On the other side, and Trump is the reason why in the 2 terms of Obama, where the ATF put out a letter saying, should we consider bump stocks to be something that's bad or not? During those 2 administrations under Obama, the ATF said, no, we'll leave bump stocks alone. After the Vegas shooting, Trump said, ATF, I want you guys to look at this again. And guess what their assertion was at that time? We're going to ban bump stocks. Okay, so it's obviously, I'm telling you guys that because there's Democrat and Republican, and you guys think sometimes that it's a Republican thing that are pro-gun and a Democrat thing that are, anti-gun. It has nothing to do with that. There are people on both sides who vote pro-gun or anti-gun. And with that, the more that we show that honesty, the more you'll realize that that person next to you, black, white, male, female, regardless of orientation or whatever, Christian or not, there are people of all spectrums, all across the board, different backgrounds, political backgrounds as well, who are pro-Second Amendment, who are pro-gun. Because it comes down to an individual human right to defend yourself. You don't care about what person you voted for when it comes down to that scenario.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. There's a lot of questions coming in. Zach, if you could help me facilitate some of these questions. Actually, let me make Zach a moderator real quick. There's a lot of.
Should we do a part 2 or something?
Do you got to go? If we got to wrap, we can.
No. I'm just in case it's too much.
There's a lot of good stuff coming in. Okay. So this just came in from my friend Tara, and I'm curious on your thoughts on this because this is kind of weird to me. It's wild. Apparently, the Kentucky Senate just passed a bill on Thursday that would make it a crime to insult police officers and boost penalties for rioting. Senate Bill 211 comes in reaction to racial justice protests in Louisville and across the state and country over the last year, and the bill's advancements comes just short after the anniversary of Breonna Taylor. And so a Republican named Danny Carroll said, I will not apologize for passing laws to protect the people of this Commonwealth, to protect the property of the business owners, to Commonwealth, to protect the first responders. The bill passed, and now he's to the House. And I don't know how familiar you are with this bill, but it seems like you disrespecting a police officer can be viewed as a crime now, the way I'm reading this. It also creates... Yeah, this is really, really interesting. I don't know if you had more chance to look into it. I just found out about this today. What are your thoughts on this?
A little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, this is why people don't even take us seriously in the conservative side, because it's picking and choosing when we look. That's anti First Amendment. Period. You should be able to say what you want to say, right? There are people like, oh, well, the truth is hate speech when it's something you don't care about, right? We do the same thing on both sides. Like, the police unions are fine as long as it's police, right? But unions in general are bad if it's on the left.
Yeah.
Same thing with, oh, well, police officers are just as fair game. If anything, they are government, right?
Yeah.
So we should be protected as civilians to be able to say what we want. Not saying that I'm saying you should do those things. Come on. I'm saying, though, that if you're going to say you're pro First Amendment and free speech, that goes both ways, right? That goes both ways. So I honestly, I don't think that.
Yeah, I think
it's silly to me.
I saw a comment on a video I did recently, and somebody said my speech was violent. And that's like a very like leftist ideology, right? That your speech can be violent. And yet we're literally seeing that logic now used to protect police officers, right? Because it's convenient for the right to now say, oh, you can be violent with speech against police. But that's just goofy. Like, that's like a really bizarre law to say you can weaponize speech. Like, if we have a true right now, that speech is limited, right? So you can't yell fire in a crowded building. You can't yell bomb on an airplane. There is some limitations to speech, but this whole notion that like speech can be violent sounds bizarre. Like, regardless on who it's coming from. AOC. Yeah, it's just super weird. Okay, so that's interesting. Yeah, I gotta look more into the law, I'll be completely honest with you, but it sounds like a very, very bizarre thing to pass, especially on a 1-year anniversary, right after the 1-year anniversary, or no, right around the 1-year anniversary of Breonna Taylor. Like, it seems like a really goofy law to pass. Jeremy Owen asked, is there anything you disagree with on the gun community or disagree with in the gun community with?
I got a lot of pushback for saying that Black Lives Matter, that those organizations, although I don't agree with a lot of what they stand for, I do understand the police brutality aspect of it. And those people are able to enjoy the Second Amendment freedoms that everybody else should enjoy just as much as anybody else on the right. So I got a lot of flack for saying, like, look, BLM should be able to be pro Second Amendment if they want to. If they want to protect themselves and their own and other people who are on the left, that's their right, just as much as it's their right on the right. So, yeah, that would probably be a lot of that type of tribalism of, if you're pro Second Amendment, you have to be pro freedom, you have to be pro liberty. As long as it looks like what I want pro freedom and pro liberty to look like, kind of like that speech against police officers type of thing. It's just a lot of hypocrisy there, where people are not across the board looking at freedoms and saying that the Second Amendment is for every single individual, even those you don't agree with as well. So we have to be more like that, but we still see a lot of that, unfortunately, in the 2A community. Yeah,
that's a bummer. That's a real, again, and I just don't understand how we can't acknowledge basic stuff. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. I really don't get it. It's like you have, like, it becomes so binary. You have to, all of it has to all be these 5 things, and if you're not as conservative as these 5 points, then you're a leftist. And I'm like, yo, and I get this on my channel, so I'm like, yo, y'all really don't listen to me. Like, you really don't understand the paradigm I'm approaching the world from. So that's a bummer. Someone asked, do you promote other, what is the word? Besides firearms, do you promote other things such as, tasers, martial arts, that kind of stuff in terms of self-defense?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And if anything, I'm trying to learn more on my side of like learning more about things that are non-lethal. But I've been a big advocate for tasers, for pepper spray. In fact, I do a lot of things with Kimber when it comes to their pepper blasters. I give that away a lot. I did a lot of stuff on college campuses where, unfortunately, you're not even talking about the gun argument. You're talking about self-defense and the fact that if you look at the actual legal code, or the code of conduct on most of these college campuses, you guys think that, oh, well, as long as you don't have a gun, that's fine. A lot of these campuses don't even think you should have a taser. In fact, in the state of Massachusetts, a taser is considered a very dangerous weapon. A pepper blaster is considered a very dangerous weapon. It is illegal for you to use it on a college campus, a public university in Massachusetts. So it's not just about gun or no gun. It's about, does that school, that entity believe that you as an individual should have the right to use something lethal or non-lethal for your own self-defense and preservation? A lot of the college campuses will say no. If you look at the college code of conduct, most of them will say no. So it's not even about gun or no gun or pro-gun or gun control or not. It's the whole level down concept is that they think that they should be the only ones who determined whether you should have the right to defend yourself. On my college campus in Texas, a few years before campus carry was in effect here in Texas, my college administration ordained means of self-defense was having my 911 already pre-dialed on my cell phone in my one hand and having my rape whistle that I would have in my other hand that I got for freshman orientation. Gosh. Like that was the code of conduct allowed type of self-defense. Obviously it's not self-defense if you're calling after the fact, but that's what a lot of people are left with is those means. So all that to say, absolutely, totally okay with tasers, totally okay with pepper blasters, but even just like a firearm, you have to know how to use those two things or you will probably get harmed in using them if you don't know.
Somebody asked this, should there be more regulations on who can receive firearms in the U.S.? Is there any form of common sense gun control that 2A supporters such as yourself advocate for, mental health rifles, etc.? I think that's a fair question. Are there any common sense gun laws that you would be I think maybe a mental health registry, or I don't know what some of the things are being proposed. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, unfortunately, anti-gunners tend to use common sense. That's a very common phrase, common sense. Unfortunately, their common sense of what they believe is common sense is, like you said, mental health registry, which, by the way, that means anybody who's using any type of antidepressants, anybody who's being right now or even in the past using type of medication for anxiety, for any type of depression, mild, major, any type of issues, even when it comes down to things that could impair you, like not just mental health illnesses, but ADHD, anything like that can be considered, depending on the person behind that legislation, as something that could impair you when you're using a firearm or you're deemed dangerous when you're using a firearm. So there's a lot of nuance to a lot of that. I will just say, based on, for example, HR 8, which is the bill, the universal background checks, which is not really, I'll go into that. And then HR 1446 that just passed the House a couple days ago in U.S. House of Representatives. So what that actually looks like when you're talking about it, people are, extending background checks, right, to a 20-day waiting period is what 1446 wants to do. You guys have a 10-day waiting period in California. So you know, like you just said, how cumbersome that is. Add that in addition to a 20-day waiting period federally. And then there's also HR 8, which is people would say universal background checks. It's not really universal background checks. It's what it's doing is saying that you, for every single transaction that you make, sans with a parent to child transaction or spouse to spouse transaction, that you have to go to a FFL, which is usually like your typical gun range, typical firearms dealers, in order to transfer that firearm. A transfer is not just I'm selling a firearm to somebody else. A transfer is, hey, like my brother in Colorado who called me up a few months ago when all this stuff with COVID was happening and all these governors were saying, look, a gun range or Second Amendment is not considered essential. Those are closed down, like what happened last year. And that's why we had such a big buying spree of guns. My brother was, oh, hey, can I borrow your firearm because I'm not able to buy any right now? Oh, yeah, can't do that because under this law, private transactions must be transferred through an FFL to another FFL. So if that's not open, like the governor says it's not essential, if that's not available to you, if the government finds out that I handed my brother a firearm to use for a limited amount of time, just to borrow, to go to the gun range, that is, you are now a felon under that law.
Wow.
So that is what the actual bills are saying. And so there's so much nuance to that there's always like fluffy language. Oh, universal background checks. Most people agree with that. Or private sales. Most people agree with that. But you don't see until you actually read the bills how it's actually going to impact you on a day-to-day basis until you're paying attention. So that's just one of the bills that people would say are common sense. So for the most part, no, I will not agree with most common sense gun control because first of all, it's not really common sense. Second of all, for the most part, if you look at the Constitution, if you look at the Second Amendment, it doesn't say anything about having common sense gun control. It says shall not be infringed, and it also says to protect your right to keep and bear arms, and that means all arms. So that's my standard.
That's good. Shout out to Camille, I think I said your name right. Sorry, boss. Thank you so much for the super chat. We had some earlier super chats, so I apologize to those of you guys that missed it. We're gonna start wrapping up here soon. There's a lot of questions coming in. Probably won't be able to get to all of them. I apologize. But hey, her name is pinned up at the very top. You guys should look her up. Are you gonna get back in the YouTube space now that your last name is different?
I know, right? So I'm not flagged and demonetized the whole channel. I think I am. I'm gonna get back on that since there's a lot of people asking questions. And again, 8 million new gun owners. I mean, there's 8 million people who are interested now. So.
How is Colian New York able to skate through and you were flagged and demonetized and all that?
I don't know.
That NRA influence, that NRA clout must go deep.
Maybe they were protecting him. I don't know. He was doing stuff before NRA, so I got to give it to him. But I don't know.
Somebody
once you get in the media, once it becomes a thing, and then you get in trouble. So
somebody asked about felons not being able to have firearms after the fact. That I think so. That's the part. Like, if someone's a felon, if someone was a violent criminal, if someone has a history of domestic violence, right? Where are you at with that kind of stuff? Because that can get very dicey, right? On like who is and isn't allowed to do certain things, or does a certain amount of time have to go by? Like what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, first you said felons at first. So
felons. Yeah,
felons is not the same thing as violent criminals.
Okay, fair enough.
So I want to make that distinction. I'm not trying to be like.
No, that's good.
I'm just saying that because when a lot of people will say felons and they just automatically think, oh yeah, they definitely shouldn't have firearms. Like, yes. Okay, but look at the law and the war on drugs and how most felons these days have a drug history if they do. And by the way, it's not just things like that. There are a lot of people should read the book 3 Felonies a Day. And if you read that book and you don't realize that you probably have already committed a felony in your own everyday life already, based on the laws in the books these days, and there are a lot, then you'll realize how easily it is to actually put yourself in that category. And most people who feel like they're other than, it's easy for them to say that, oh, they shouldn't have their rights. But honestly, regardless if you think they should have that right or not, they still do. Now, obviously, there should be protections on that, because once someone is harming you in your life, that's them actually infringing on your right for life, and that's a different thing. But everybody, like I said, has a human right to defense and to protect themselves. Here in Texas, actually, and in Georgia, after 5 years, after you've done after your jail time and you've actually finished all of your parole afterwards, probation, you are actually able to regain your Second Amendment right and are able to keep a firearm in your home for self-defense. So anyways, all that to today, that's usually state by state. But for the most part, when people are talking about that whole conversation, they're talking about felons, and they're forgetting that most felons are nonviolent, and they should have a right to get their Second Amendment protections back.
What about folks that have been violent in the past?
Yeah, if they've shown in the past that they obviously can't use something and use it for something that's not evil, then obviously, yeah, they've already forfeited that right.
So you would say
legal terms.
That would be some of the regulation you do support, is if someone has been violent, if someone has committed I don't know, robberies or domestic violence, then you would agree with some form of regulation on that type of person.
I would agree that if it's already on the books and that person has already forfeited that right, then that's something that they've already given away. So
it's good. Yeah, I'm sorry guys, we're probably not going to be able to go through all of these, but someone said something about someone came late, hit her with my empathy question. Which empathy question are you talking about? I don't see your empathy question. I'm trying to scroll up. I think he missed the majority of the stream and is asking. Oh, here we go. Anyone advocating for gun control on a federal basis displays a complete lack of empathy. The other half of the population lives in rural settings. Gun violence is a city life problem. Okay. I think we talked about, right? I don't understand what the question is. Anyone advocating for gun control on a federal basis? Okay.
I think he's on my side, maybe.
Okay.
I think he's trying to say that you're lacking. Essentially, I think he's trying to flip the script where people make it seem like
I'm lacking empathy
you're
for
not
folks
empathetic,
in the country
who are gun rights,
who have guns. Look, guys, by and large, I have no problem with people having guns. Just FYI, I don't know. I'm a liberal for gun rights, I guess. Shout out to Beautiful Crazy Life. So yeah, I'm asking questions that I think most people who are somewhere in the middle. By the way, I think most people are somewhere in the middle on these issues. Like, I know the media wants to tell us that we're like super polarized and you have to believe everything one side believes, and if you don't believe it, right? Most people have a spectrum of views and really probably feel cornered into voting for a specific party in general, right? So I think that's why it's good to have these long form, nuanced conversations to know that it's not just black and white. Do you have any final thoughts? Anything you want to leave us with? What do you have in the pipeline that people should check out? Obviously, follow you on Instagram. If you guys, you could look her up. If you're having trouble, you can go to my stories. I just reposted one of her stories. I follow her. Twitter, all that kind of stuff. But what do you want to leave us with? How can they get a hold of you? What's in the pipipeline? Talk to us.
Yeah, I would. The people we weren't able to get to the questions, or if you have more questions, please email me. I'm very open. Go to, it's Antonia, so Antonia at gunowners.org. That's my work email. But if you just want to go personal, just go Antonia. My maiden name, Okafor, Okafor @gmail.com. And please email me all your questions. I am happy to email back. The organization Empowered 2A is a women's outreach arm of Gun Owners of America. If you want to check out GOA, go to gunowners.org. Join the mailing list. There's a lot of stuff in the pipeline going forward. But empowered2a.org is the website for specific stuff on Empowered. We actually have a live stream a Zoom meeting on Wednesday, and we're going to be talking about the history of actually feminism and those key feminist movement people and who are also pro-gun, and talking about why gun rights are women's rights, why gun rights are human rights. So it's going to be a good conversation, and you can ask more questions on that live stream as well. So that's on Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern.
That's awesome. I really like that. Okay, so last thing. This is an interesting question. Anthony said, folks who have mental health issues, if a person with mental health issues desires a gun, they should be required to take medication. That's because what mental health issue are we talking about? Are we talking about bipolar? Are we talking about schizophrenia? What is your thoughts on that? Folks who have like a psychotic disorder, in light of the conversation we're having now, how do you view that? Like, do they need to show a degree of responsibility? Like, how do you process that?
I've grown a lot in my understanding when it comes to mental health because, like I said, I'm a sexual assault survivor, which very, very hard. And you said that also you're a survivor. Very hard for someone, particularly someone who's 5 years old and sexually assaulted, not to have some type of mental health issue, depression, anxiety, which I still am dealing with today. That's a lot of women who have PTSD because of sexual assault. A lot of men also. I mean, think about veterans, PTSD. Like I'm saying, all of those would be considered with the government as someone who would be considered dangerous to have a firearm. That's what we're looking at right now with red flag laws. That's a whole other conversation, guys. I would love to come back and talk about that because there's a lot of nuance on that. That's the whole mental health conversation that we're having with red flag laws. Just know that most of the time, these are not just dealing with some person that you probably never gonna met because you don't know anybody who's mentally unstable, or you don't know anybody who's having issues with PTSD. But for the most part, you do. Very most part you do. And I wouldn't even go off to say, I would go off to say that more than likely it's you, and there are more people who have issues that would be considered mental health issues in the gun space like that would nix you from being a part of firearm ownership. So anyways, all that to say is that there are a lot of people who deal with that issue, and the government would consider a lot of those people dangerous when it comes to having a firearm.
Yeah, and I mean, when I went to therapy, that was the diagnosis they gave me was that I had onset PTSD from being molested as a kid, and I didn't really understand that. I didn't have a definition for it, and I'm glad I got a definition for it. But that I definitely think that probably changes even my frame of thinking on it to say, well, shoot, by that logic, like, and I didn't take medication or anything like that, right? So by that logic, would somebody then tell me that I need to be medicated right? And I don't think I'm pretty sure I don't need medication, right? I just try to eat well and sleep well and work out. So that's interesting.
But it should be your choice. The thing is, it should be your choice if you need medication or not.
Yes. Yes. Hey, thank you so much. This has been super cool. I'm so grateful we were able to do this. I'm going to try to chop these up into individual clips. And hopefully we can have you back. And hopefully we can get you back on YouTube now that your last name is Cover. And do a little
and not be
switch.
flagged.
Yeah, not get flagged. Yeah, you just gotta say things carefully. You know, we'll see. We'll finish this. I'll DM you and tell you if this got demonetized.
Okay.
We'll see if we slid through. Man, I'm gonna chop it up. I'm gonna chop it up and see how many different clips we can get in this. But thank you so much. Again, hey, follow her. Give her a DM, email, all that kind of stuff. I'm sorry she's not on YouTube yet, but she will be. And your interview, I loved your interview on PragerU. I thought that was really good. Enough folks are like, PragerU. But yeah, I think you guys will appreciate you. And so hopefully, we'll see. We'll see if this gets demonetized. So I'm trying to say stuff. Yeah, her name is pinned up.
Like,
and Antonia Cover is her new name. And the original last name was Okafor.
Yeah. So Antonia _Okafor for Twitter and Instagram.
Yeah.
Same handle.
Yep. Thank you so much, sis. This has been real. Guys, give this video a thumbs up before you leave. Whoa, that was weird. Give this video a thumbs up before you leave. And make sure you're subscribed. Like 52% of the people who watch this are not subscribed. So hit that subscription button. And here is a little video about an upcoming course me and Zach Sparazzo are doing. There's a free training in the description if you're thinking about getting in a YouTube space. You guys can check that out. Hey, thank you so much for making it through the end of this video. If you enjoyed it and maybe you're feeling inspired to jump into some YouTube creator content, maybe you're an expert in the field, I have a super dope course coming very soon. No, it's not a $5,000 or $1,000 mastermind course. It's going to be extremely affordable. So that's on the way, but we want to give you guys a free training and PDF that's available right now. So be sure to opt into that in the description below or in the cards. Joshua the King came down and bore it all. Yeah, conversations front of the fireplace. All of my mistakes, how do I erase? Wanna operate at a higher pace. Birth pains causing the body to dilate. On a first name basis with the worst pain facing. Moments in isolation. See,